Welcome back, everyone, to Open Line. Glad you're with us. We're talking about the proposed congressional redistricting that would divide Davidson County into 3 districts. We have with us Gloria Sweet-Love. She is president of the NAACP in Tennessee, and Dr. Sakou Franklin. He's also with the NAACP, and he's part of the Redistricting Political Action Chair. And Dr. Franklin, I want to ask you, you've been looking at this all across the country. Are you seeing the same kind of thing? Again, what you all are saying is gerrymandering and that kind of thing. Are you seeing the same kind of thing in other states, or what are you seeing?
Yeah. So yes, we're part of the NAACP. Unfortunately, President Sweet-Love has allowed me to sit in on some meetings of other partners, other NAACP chapters from across the region, from Ohio to Wisconsin, Virginia, Georgia, Texas. And I'm leaving out 1 or 2 states, and we're seeing the same kinds of things. It's not just gerrymandering, because gerrymandering is a long-standing issue, but it's excessive gerrymandering is splitting communities, and it's done at the expense of African American voters in particular. And the playbook is quite similar to what we're seeing in Tennessee. The playbook is not just about these kinds of measures that's diluting Black communities and Black vote. But interestingly enough, what we're seeing is that in some of these areas, the community mobilization is actually strong. So actually, communities have been holding hearings, holding meetings, engaging groups, engaging lawmakers in the lead up to the redistricting process. And despite all of that input, then we're finding that state legislatures are passing redistricting plans that are very problematic. And we're also finding problems at the local level and some county commission seats and other things. If I can just make one distinction that you mentioned earlier about the Democrats said that they may sue. In the redistricting universe, there's a distinction between lawsuits that are brought by the Democrats and legal claims or grievances brought by voting rights groups and equity-based groups. And what the NAACP is looking at this is through the frame of, in terms of advocacy in other areas, through the frame of voting rights and equity and mobilizing communities to have input. So I just want to make sure I point that, because that is a real distinction. All right,
I don't think I even understand what you're saying. So if the Democrats sue, that's one thing. You're saying it's a whole separate thing. Should the NAACP be involved in a lawsuit? Is that what you're saying?
Around the country, in many states, what you have is a Democratic lawsuit, and then you have lawsuits brought by long-standing, 60, 70, 80, 100-year-old civil rights organizations, and there's a fundamental distinction between those kinds of legal claims. Again, I'm not saying anything's going to happen. As President Sweet-Love said, we're following her lead and the national office lead, but I want to make sure that is a clear distinction that has to be made.
So there could be 2 lawsuits. There could be the Democratic Party could sue, and then voting organizations like the NAACP could sue.
And there's also there could be also what we're hearing is a state constitutional dispute about the state legislative plans that splits counties. So there could be a constitutional claim brought on the state legislative redistricting plans based upon how many county splits could happen. So you could have multiple lawsuits emerging from this, or you may not have any. It's still to be determined in terms of all the different players that are involved in this issue.
And President Sweet-Love, when do you think you will determine, or the NAACP will determine? You said, I guess, your attorneys are looking at it. When will the NAACP determine whether or not they are going to sue?
Well, I think it will be sooner than later. But as Dr. Franklin said, remember, we are an advocacy organization. We are nonpartisan. We've got voters, members that vote Republican, members that vote Democrat, members that vote Independent. But we, along with a number of other advocacy groups, are concerned about the clear violations when you violate, a voter's right to be represented. And that one person, one vote is really, really critical. But it will be sooner rather than later. We would expect to hear something soon.
And Dr. Franklin was talking about all the education that was going on in other parts of the country, and I would think here in Tennessee. Do you think there was a lot of education prior to this? Again, this happens every 10 years. Sometimes it can be kind of hard to wrap your arms around. Sometimes people might go, I don't know how much this affects me. How do you feel like people were educated leading up to this, and do you feel like this is inspiring them to get even more educated? Or what do you think about, you know, the level of education before, and what does this inspire people to do?
I think people were clearly educated. I will plug in and say Dr. Franklin was way ahead of the game, even looking at our national players for NAACP and other the advocacy organizations, because we actually started training last spring, in the spring of 2021, explaining to people what the process was about, having public hearings. We actually met with the chair of the committee, of the redistricting committee, actually had public hearings across the state, gave the results of those, invited him to a number of those hearings, gave the results of those hearings to him. So we were very involved in the process, had a number of people, although a lot of them were done hybrid, part virtual and part in person, but had a number of people there speaking, asking questions, getting informed. I think this does make a difference, because this helps people to understand when we talk about one person, one vote, and how critical it is to be involved. We cannot, voting rights are not about just waiting until the candidate forum is decided and then deciding who I'm going to vote for on that day and showing up to vote. It is really about advocacy, about informing others, about making sure that all the information possible is there so a person can make the very best choice.
We have several calls now. I'm going to start with Reverend Fuzz. It's always great to hear from Reverend Fuzz. Hello, Reverend Fuzz.
Hey, Ben. Good evening to President Sweet-Love and our friend Sakou.
Good evening.
It's good to see y'all. I got a couple quick questions for you, Ben.
Okay, go right ahead.
Under redistricting, all over the country, this is happening, you know. And so the Democrats, when they're in power, they split it up the way they wanted to be split up, and Republicans vice versa. And you know, most people don't like this partisan politics. But anyway, if there were Democrats in power in Nashville, in Tennessee, wouldn't they be doing the same thing to Republicans? I mean, splitting the districts. I'm not talking about the voting thing. And then with this being Dr. King's holiday week, I want to ask this question because he talked about this. Blacks, white, Jews, Gentiles, Catholics, and Protestants will join hands and walk down the streets of brotherhood together. Do we see that kind of a vision for America when it's going to be people, Americans, and that we've done away with the racism stuff? You think that's ever a possibility for America? This I have a dream. Do you think that'll ever happen in America? Or what needs to happen to bring us closer to that right here in Nashville? That we've done away with segregation and racism and gentrification, but we're just people in this city. That's kind of deep, but that's me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Fuzz. All right, two great questions. Wouldn't Democrats do the same thing as one? But I'll start with the other one, which I really like. Dr. King's vision. Is it a possibility? What needs to happen to bring us closer to Dr. King's vision? And President Sweet-Love, I'll start with you on that. Again, MLK Day yesterday. What about that?
I'm going to say, yeah. Well, I'm going to say something that one of my board members said, and we thought so much of the statement that we put it on our website. He said, don't celebrate King without doing the work of the kingdom. And I really do think if you look back at Dr. King's legacy, people want to talk about he was a dreamer. He was not a dreamer. He was a doer. He fought for voters' rights. He fought for that. He fought to make sure he opposed the gerrymandering in Alabama. You know, he spoke out against that. I think we will see a difference when all of the folks that believe in right and believe in advocacy and believe in the right of every person, when they get involved. As long as people are willing for a few folks to get out here and work hard and the rest of them stand on the sideline, we cannot move toward being the kind of nation, being a true democracy. But I think everyone has to be involved. Everyone has to advocate for that which is right.
Well, and before I go to Dr. Franklin, let me follow up with you, Dr. Sweet-Love. So voter participation in Tennessee is pretty low, pretty bad. We don't have a high, that's kind of just a fact, anybody would agree. We don't have high voter participation. If that's the case, if voter participation is not that great, is his vision a possibility? I mean, you said it's going to take everybody working together or not staying, but we have so many people who aren't even voting and that kind of thing. Is it a possibility the way things are right now?
Yes, it's a possibility. It's a possibility because we have to keep pushing forward to make sure that people are involved. We have to keep getting rights restored to former incarcerated people so that they can vote. We have to keep finding people and making sure they are registered. And not only are they registered, but they get out to vote and that they are informed. So yes, we've got to, but everybody has to be involved. That one of the other things people don't talk about, he said all it takes for evil is to flourish is that when good people do nothing. If we just sit around and get on Facebook and get on Twitter and say, woe is me, and you don't get involved and try to get somebody's rights restored, try to get somebody registered to vote, speak out on issues and inform people, it can't change. It takes all of us to make the change. It
takes more than saying something on Facebook. I agree with that. All right, yes. Dr. Franklin, all right, if you want to respond, I think it's a fascinating question about Dr. King's legacy. That's great. I also want to ask, the question that Reverend Fuzz also raised, which is, and even Cameron Sexton said this, well, Democrats did it to us, so we're going to basically, nobody said anything back then. Democrats didn't say anything when they were in charge, and so, this is the way it goes. I mean, Republicans are in control. He didn't say it was gerrymandering, but he did say Democrats did it to us, and Democrats didn't say anything. The implication being, now it's our turn, and we have the right to do it, and so we're doing it. What about that?
Well, that's a complicated question because partisan gerrymandering does occur, and it has occurred on both sides, going back generations, going back a century, with both parties. I think, in the Supreme Court, in what I think is a crazy decision, has allowed for not just partisan gerrymandering, a set of decisions, but excessive partisan gerrymandering. I'm not entirely sure or don't think that Cameron Sexton is actually accurate in that statement, however, is because when he says they did it to us, at least in the redistricting cycles that occurred in previous years, the margins between Republicans and Democrats were much closer than what you find today in terms of who has the majority. And because of those margins were much closer today, but back then, it required more negotiation between Republicans and Democrats so that even though gerrymandering existed, Republicans were able to get something out of gerrymandering. But what we're seeing in Tennessee is something different. We mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. I go back to the 1957, July 2nd, mass meeting that Martin Luther King Jr. participated in Tuskegee, in which Martin Luther King Jr. joined with the Tuskegee Civics Association in opposing the excessive gerrymander that drew African Americans out of Tuskegee. It ultimately led to the Gamillion versus Lightfoot case, which was one of the most important redistricting cases that we've seen. In other words, Martin Luther King Jr. was opposed to excessive gerrymandering that severely harmed African American voters. And this is what you find with the Cameron Sexton's plan. You don't find gerrymandering or partisan gerrymandering in the traditional sense, but you find extreme plans that dilute the African American vote. And I'm not sure that when Democrats had control of the legislature in 2000 and previous to that, I'm not sure Democrats split Knox County, which has a long history of electing local Republicans. I'm not sure they split it three ways. Right. I'm not sure they split Hamilton County three ways. I'm not sure they split those two urban counties that have long-standing groups of Republicans in the way that they did that. In fact, I would venture to say they did not. So what we're seeing today is a very extreme version And again, based upon our background information that we received, we know that this plan was put in place as early as last year. We know that race was under consideration. At least, some conservatives were talking about should they split Shelby County or Davidson County, and they looked at race as part of the configuration. So I think what we're seeing is something different than just your typical partisan gerrymandering that occurs in every single redistricting cycle.
Okay. All right, we have to take a break. Willie May is on the line. Hold on, Willie May. We'll take a break. And if you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.